JB here. Let's see. Hope everyone's doing outstanding. Wednesday, October 22nd, 9:14 on this fine morning talk. Quick about the market. Some names I'm looking at go from there. S&P futures slightly in the red here. Actually, slightly in the green here, up about 10%. Been bouncing around between gains and losses, so kind of like a flat mixed morning. Nothing to write home about yesterday. A tight trading range, right? Point 0.2, I think it was 0.27%. That was on the heels of the wide swings we saw earlier in the month. The big Trump tweet around China that caused the big sell off, and then kind of as the markets grappled with the possible ramifications, and then I wouldn't say we're back to normal here, but it was almost like a greed reset. And we're back to tight trading ranges. I would like to see another tight trading range. Today is not much in the way of catalysts. Big CPI data on Friday and earnings. So yesterday was Netflix after the close. I was talking about being somewhat muted expectation of the report. And you know what? They posted, I thought it was a great quarter, but there's some Brazilian tax snafu or dispute that Netflix and Brazil are having. Cost them up in the excess of 600 million. Big hit to their EPS. But outside of that, huge stuff. I mean, to me, and considering where their stock has been, it's run up 40%. Not a bad move this morning, all things considered. I mean, of course, if you're in calls, then disappointing. Sitting here at 11:50. But I'll talk more about Netflix later. Today I have to close Tesla. Tomorrow Intel. Also have to close yesterday Intuitive Surgical. I'll talk about that in a second. But to me, another tight trading range today. Yesterday just dipped under 670 for a fraction, then bounce around and maybe 675. That's the upward resistance if we get up there, where I think maybe there'll be some possible supply. And then on the flip side, I talk about 658 and 653. Hopefully we don't get there this week, but definitely defined areas. I'll continue to list there. I'm not saying 658 on the watch list as a target this week. Number one, you never know, right? I mean, no scenario is out of play with we're one tweet away from craziness, right? On both sides. But it's always good to know. And I just want to have that as a mental stop that if things ever if the poop hits the fan again, areas to watch, right? All right, so that's kind of overall market. Also things to note that I think are good things, the yields, right? So the 10-year, did I get my charts up here today? I don't know if I updated my charts. Oh, I didn't update my charts here today. All right, no big deal. So good thing to note is the 10 years under 4%. It remains under 4%. So I think, again, more good stuff. And as long as that continues, I was talking about the Fed that you couldn't, you don't want to have the Fed in a spot where they're doing these jumbo rate cuts or large rate cuts. To me, I think the best thing is when Powell did his Jackson Hole speech, he was able to kind of like talk the rates down, right? And I think that continues. The Fed is 0.25% rate cuts at least to next week, and then the one in December. And I think that bodes well if the rates stay down here. We saw the reaction last year. Fed did their jumbo rate cut, and that was the low in yields for quite some time, and we're getting there. So, all right, that's quick on overall market. Just quick on some individual names. At first, I'll talk about Flowers. 1-800-Flowers, FLWS. There's names, and if you don't know my history, and one day I'll do a long rant out. I used to trade penny stocks like 15, 20 years ago, and that's some of the reasons I stumbled into stock options. Back in the day, you didn't know there was an instrument that you can make thousands of percent on stocks, right? You thought, oh, I'm going to trade Apple, and if you're up 4% on a day, unless you're hyped into margin and you get your account super margin, your 4% is not going to be 100% gains. It's going to be even if you margin 8%, whatever. So that's the only way to kind of like exacerbate your gains is to be on some kind of margin count, or you trade the penny stocks, and penny stocks, again, sub $5 sometimes are up 10, 20%, but the ones that really move to the micro cap stocks, the stocks under whatever. So that's kind of how I stumbled into the option. So I'm pretty good. And some of the reason I'm good, especially with due diligence, is because in the micro cap world, you need to be able to kind of like peel back the onion, do due diligence, find things that other people aren't looking at, right? I mean, that's how you find the names before they run. That's how you make the big money, in my opinion, right? That's why when you see me, I don't trade Apple much, because to me, Apple is the most price discovered company on the planet, right? The highest liquidity. Well, not any, I don't think it's the highest traded. Now it's NVIDIA and what have you. But to me, it's like if you have all these mines and all this money into one stock, how can you not game the system, but how can you beat the odds, right? Because the odds are, when it's a crowd and everybody's betting, there's more folks that are going to get it right than wrong. So to me, it's very hard to, anyway, so I don't want to go into these long rants here, but that's, over the years, some of the best trades I have are on these undiscovered names. I'm not saying 1-800-Flowers undiscovered name, but you saw Beyond Meat running. I saw it. They did their offering was a penny that was under $1 last week, and I'm watching it rallying. And you look at the name, and I mean, Beyond Meat's a name I'm very familiar with, right? I've traded it in the hundreds, $200, wherever it went to. But it's one of those names where people are talking about the future of food, where it's like maybe it's not the case. And great point. I don't know who posted yesterday in the chat room, but back in the COVID days, and meat was coming flying off the tables, off the supermarket shelves, and you go to the supermarket, there'd be no meat, and then there'd be an entire section of Beyond Meat still there, right? So if that explained Beyond Meat in a nutshell, I think that was the picture of the story, where there's one side that says this is the future, and the other side said, oh, if it was the future, you would think in the biggest demand issue in meat, it was still on the shelf, right? So fast forward, I see it running, and I'm not saying it can't continue to squeeze. If I thought it'd run up to $7, $8, $9 today, or even run up yesterday, I would have got some calls. The thing is, I was looking at the calls yesterday, and even with it at $3, all the calls were up like 200-300%. The stock was up 150%. So not the type of risk reward, right? If the stock's up 150%, I think the underlying options should be up thousands of percent. So you had to figure there was going to be some follow through on some of the other highly shorted names. We saw it back in the summer when open started to run. Saw it again earlier when open started to go. So sure enough, I'm looking at Flowers, and John Na, I forget how you pronounce your name in the chat room. John Na mentioned it last week on Flowers as a name to run up his seasonality into the holiday season. Not the sexy name, right? 1-800-Flowers. It's not a sexy name, but it's a name that's come off its highs. It's a highly shorted name, over 35% short interest, and it still does $1.something billion in revenue. So they've had like a turnaround story. They've hired some folks to the board of directors, and maybe some things that you could say, you make the case that this bounces. So even when I looked last week, I'm like, oh, this might be a nice bounce. And then I was looking yesterday, and as all these other short names were starting to get a bid, I'm like, Flowers, 1-800-Flowers, huge short interest, probably a name that gets some follow through. Got those lotto calls. I said, hero zero. And it looks like this morning, we'll see where it goes today. It's going to be a hero trade. So got the November strikes. I put on the watch list, and this is when the stocks are trading at $6.50 or $7. So it went all the way up to 9 just a second ago, close to it. This could be $10 or it could be back under 5, right? So there's some risk there, but to me, the best way to ride this is going to lock some in right at the open. My call's going to be up a couple 100%. I don't know what those are going to be. I mean, there's $7 strikes sitting here at $7.50. You have to think there'd be $1.50, maybe $2, so 300-400%. Then I'll ride the rest, because you never know, right? I mean, this could get follow through. This may go back down to $5, but the best way to be able to hold that emotion free, locks them in. So that's the flowers.com story. All right, now we'll quick on to other names. So, obviously gold got lucky. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. I mean, gold's been on a massive rally. I've been thankful enough not to have tried to time the top on gold over this massive move this year. Finally got some, I did it once back in the summer, and I think I was able to lock some in for free and ride the rest. But finally got some of the dust calls on Friday with gold selling off, because you have to think at some point it's going to be a massive move. And I wrote an article back in 2013, and I think it was March 2013. It was St. Patrick's Day, and I said no gold at the end of the rainbow, kind of like on a play on St. Patrick's Day. And then gold went to have its worst session in decades. I think it was down 7%. Fast forward to 2025, 12 years later, got the dust calls, and gold just had its worst session since 2013, right? Somewhere in March. Funny how that works. But anyway, thankful to be in the dust calls, but frustrating, right? And I posted on FinTwit yesterday that this is kind of like epitomizes an option trader, right? You watch a stock go up 5%, you see the underlying call contract, and that call contract's up 100%, right? But if you're in the stock and the stock goes up 5%, the underlying call contract is up 10%. It's funny how that works. It just feels that way sometimes. But so the point of the story is the dust calls, which you would think dust is up 20% yesterday. You would think the calls would be up substantial, and they weren't. But the thing is, at some point, gold would have some kind of bounce. So I didn't want to be in a spot where my profits evaporated. So I locked some of the dust calls in for 60%, took some more off for 80%, and then I went and got some higher strikes. We'll see what happens here today. Dust is at $12. I would assume my November 13th is going to be up 150, 200%. So I might lock some more in, might lock some of the higher strikes in, just ride the rest. I put on a watch list too. I mean, to me, gold might go down to $3,800. Probably gonna be bouncy if it does, but I'm not gonna sit here and try and time that, because if I do, I'm sure there's gonna be a bounce and it's gonna take the profits away. So I'd rather just ride those dust calls, because if it does get to $3,800 for my November expiration, I mean the call is gonna pay off. The reward is gonna be strong, big enough anyway, without having to like double down. So that's the thought process there in gold and dust, and I'll continue to look for opportunities to lock some of those in. And then some other names here. Intuitive Surgical this time this morning. Yesterday morning, I was talking about Intuitive Surgical, trying to get some spec calls, and same on Monday. Because here's the thing I'm going to have to do this overnight if I get some time, and time's a resource I don't have much of recently for some reason. But I've got to find some of these names that have been sold off on earnings that were strong earnings and haven't come back. I would say come back to their levels, but just have struggled. And you look at Intuitive Surgical, the stock, huge move, right? And I think it was 650 back in May and February. It just hasn't come back to life, even after Liberation Day, right? Uh, and then it's like there's no news, no catalyst. I thought maybe the Johnson & Johnson robot was a competitive situation was weighing, but it wasn't. And it just like, boom, earnings come in, and they weren't like knock your socks off, the best earnings I've ever seen Intuitive Surgical ever do. But here's the stock up $80, like 15% on earnings that, they could have happened last quarter, and the stock is up 2%. I'm like, oh, okay, it makes sense. So it's just funny how I forget which quarter, what stock did it too, where MDB, right? MDB had the same type of situation, great earnings, and then you would think the stock would be up more, and it gapped, but then sold off, and then it sold all the way down until the next earnings. Then finally, that was the one that it finally took off. So I don't know if Decker's another name. It's still sitting around $100. That could be a name I'll be watching, but there's got to be some of these other names that have some earnings ones. But needless to say, I'm looking at the Intuitive Surgical Lotto calls for some premium build, and the calls were up 70% yesterday, and the stock was up 1%. I'm like, it's going to get me in. Then it's going to post a dud or just a flat quarter, and the stock's going to do nothing. And then sure enough, this monster quarter, those 530s, I think they were like 70, 80 cents. They're going to be like $10. So what are you going to, you can't cry over the spilled milk. I'll have to look for other opportunities. So that's Intuitive Surgical. Then just some of the other names here. And I talked about that the market holding up yesterday in a tight range, I think bodes well. And I think that's also in the face of all the quantum names, that the nuclear names all selling off yesterday. I think that's a good sign. So needless to say, that brings me to NKLR. I keep posting that in the chat room. At some point, maybe I'll nibble some spec lotto calls there, because you got to think at some point that goes, but it's below its SPAC levels. It's close at 885. Not much else to say on some of these other names. Serve Robotics, all the way up into the 15s, that it's patented dollar swing and sitting here at $14. I'll just continue to hold my calls there. I think that's it, folks. We've got 4 minutes to the open. I don't want to rant too much. If anything changes during the day, I'll get on do a rant later. Let's have a great day. We're rock and roll.